for the Colorado's application for grid resilience and microgrids for community resilience. It's just the top of the hour here. I think we might wait one more minute before we get started. It looks like we've got 40 participants right now. So my name is John Parks. I'm with the Colorado Energy Office. I'm the electricity markets and transmission policy analyst. And this is an interagency team that has put this together. We've been working together for several months. And so I'm going to pass it off to Ann Miller, who is from the Department of Local Affairs and is the director of the Colorado Resiliency Office.
Thank you, and thank you all for joining us and welcome. So yes, my name is Ann Miller and I'm the director of the Colorado Resiliency Office. We're in the Department of Local Affairs. And we're so pleased to team with the Colorado Energy Office to share upcoming opportunities to build grid resilience throughout Colorado with new federal and state funding, and to get your input today and in the coming couple of weeks on our proposed approach. So the first part of the meeting will focus on Colorado's application for the grid resilience federal funding, and that's going to be led by the Colorado Energy Office in the presentation. And then we'll have a second part of the meeting that will cover the microgrids for community resilience grant program, spearheaded by my office in the Colorado Department of Local Affairs under House Bill 22-1013. So you'll hear more about this. I'll pass it on to Dominique Gomez, the Deputy Director of the Colorado Resilience Office, to kick off with an overview of the meeting purpose and agenda and get started. Thanks.
Thank you, Ann. My name is Dominique Gomez. As Ann said, I'm the Deputy Director here at the Energy Office. Thank you all for joining us on this beautiful snowy evening. Today, we are going to describe some new interrelated state and federal funding opportunities to increase the resilience of the grid here in Colorado. So we'll talk a little bit about the microgrids program and how we plan to use both state and federal funds to advance microgrids throughout the state. We'll also be talking about advancing monitoring of distribution systems, as well as grid hardening and distribution line updates. We provided some information a few days ago in terms of our narrative, and we will be taking as many public comments as we can get to today after we do some initial introductions, but we will also be accepting public comments through December 5th. We will be sure to share in the chat and in the Q&A those links to provide public comment, as well as the documents themselves. So if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A through the Zoom. Again, we'll get to as many public comments as we can today, but then also expect to get most of those comments through that written form. And with that, I want to thank my colleagues both at the Energy Office and at our sister agencies at the Department of Local Affairs and the Department of Regulatory Affairs for their work on this. We're very excited for this huge opportunity for our state. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, John.
Great. Thank you very much, Marguerite. There we go. There's a video. Yes. This is, as I mentioned, is an interagency working group that's been focused on this project. Everybody should have received an email that has the link that I just put in the chat that has the website for this event. You can download several documents for this event from that website. One of them is the slides that are actually on that website. And if you downloaded those slides before about noon today, those links that are in the slideshow don't work, but we replaced it. And so if you want to just re-download them, anytime you see some information or some text that is underlined in a different color that has a hyperlink in it, and you're welcome to click on that for some further information. I just want to make just a short announcement that this meeting is being recorded. And so if you would prefer not to have not to be recorded, then you can keep your camera off and muted during the question and answer session. So just a brief agenda for today. First, we're going to talk about our climate resiliency and strategy for the state of Colorado. We'll give a little bit of background on the Infrastructure Innovation and Jobs Act, or IIJA, Electric Grid Resiliency Funding. Then we'll talk about Colorado's proposed use of that funding. Then we'll pass it off to my colleagues, Marguerite Hardin and Julia Masters at the Department of Local Affairs, who are going to be talking about microgrids program that we're getting stood up through this process. And then we'll talk about they will talk about additional funding opportunities, and we'll tell you how to submit some comments on the on our process that we have ongoing right now. And as Dominique mentioned, those will be due by December 5th. Then we'll have some time for discussion and comments. So our first portion of this meeting is focusing on the public hearing for Colorado's application for grid resilience, and this is a section of the infrastructure bill. So Colorado's climate and resiliency strategy is really building on some documents and programs that we already have in place. There's our greenhouse gas pollution reduction roadmap, which was released in January of 2021. The Energy Assurance Emergency Plan was recently released as well, in the Colorado Resiliency Framework. And through these, Colorado will create a grid resilience and reliability study to guide investments. That's going to be part of our focus of this funding, but the broader focus is to support initial investments and solutions that make energy systems resilient while advancing an equitable transition to a low carbon economy. So I've said this IIJA, and I believe I misspoke a little bit a while ago. It's the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. It became law almost exactly a year ago. And it's also referred to as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So you might see it as BIL or IIJA. It produces 5 years of funding and about 60 different programs. So it's a really a once in a lifetime funding opportunity for updating infrastructure in so many different areas, from communication, transportation, but especially in the electricity sector, and that's what we're focused on here today. We are applying our funding through the Department of Energy. So this funding is for preventing outages and enhancing the resilience of the electric grid. This is what we call formula funding. So the federal government has designated all the states and territories and quite a number of the Indian tribes will receive a set number of dollars for 5 years. They've identified that set amount for year one, which you see here is $8,635,068. But they're anticipating that number to be about the same for each of the subsequent 5 years. So we're going to be applying soon after the start of 2023 for 2 years of funding. And you can see that the total there, about 17,000. And we also appreciate everyone's patience, because we originally had planned on having this meeting in early September, and we moved it back because the DOE deadline was moved back to March 31st. we are planning on applying before March 31st, and we've been indicated that those funds will be available on a rolling basis. But we would like to get all those comments on this process from you by December 5th by 5 p.m. so we can incorporate all those comments into our application. And that application is also found on our website. And maybe, Julia, if you could put that website in the chat there, or the link in the chat for that application, that'd be great. So eligible entities for this funding, this is called the 40101D funding. And the eligible entities are electric grid operators, electric storage operator, electric generator, transmission owner or operator, distribution provider, a fuel supplier, or any other relevant entity as determined by the Secretary of the Department of Energy. So I believe that's most of the folks on this call probably represent a utility, whether it's municipally owned or a co-op or an investor-owned utility. But I know we have a number of other folks in the call as well. So here's the qualified uses for this funding. The infrastructure bill is quite prescriptive on how this funding can be used. And so it can be used for weatherization technologies, fire-resistant technologies, monitoring and control technologies, undergrounding electrical equipment, utility pole management, the relocation of power lines, vegetation and fuel load management, the use or construction of distributed energy resources for enhancing system adaptive capacity during disruptive events, such as microgrids and battery storage subcomponents, adaptive protection technologies, advanced modeling technologies, hardening of power lines, facilities, substations, or other systems from weather events, fire, or otherwise, and the replacement of old overhead conductors and underground cables. It should be noted that these qualified uses are on the distribution lines and the transmission lines, but it's not, one of the allowable uses is not actually generation of electricity. So Colorado's proposed plan of investments are, initial investments are on the construction or use of distributed energy resources for enhancing system adaptive capacity during disruptive events, including microgrids and battery storage subcomponents. We've had a number of wildfires in recent years and are expecting more in the upcoming years. And that is one of our big focuses of this funding is seeing how we can harden our communities, prevent outages from those wildfires. We're also looking at flexible funding for rural utilities within any of those specified eligible uses that you saw on the last slide. We know that many of our rural utilities have a big backlog of projects that they'd like to get to, and hopefully this will help you attend to some of those needed projects. Also, we're looking at investments in monitoring and control technologies with a particular focus on the use of drones and other advanced monitoring technology to secure rural and remote electric delivery systems. We're really looking towards you, the stakeholders, the applicants, as more of the experts in this area, and we're really interested to see what kind of projects come forward applying for this advanced monitoring. We're also looking for provision of technical assistance and additional study that will help identify vulnerable areas and populations and help prioritize future investment. Great. Thanks for putting that in the chat there, Julia. You can also see the proposed budget here. This is for year one of the funding. We are in a great situation here in Colorado because with the infrastructure bill, this section of the infrastructure bill, 40101D, it requires a 15% match from the state. Last year, the state set up a fund for microgrids, which is a big portion of the funds that we're going to be using in this program. And that portion, that fund will supply the matching funds for this program. You can see here in blue that on the bottom left corner, that those are those matching funds. And then our 4 programs that we are applying to the U.S. Department of Energy for this funding. The largest share is for microgrids. Then there's that rural and small community flexible use, advanced monitoring, and then studies, technical support, and administration. We are anticipating the year 1 and year 2 funding to be fairly similar. And so we're going to be applying for both. And so this is those same numbers from the previous slide multiplied by 2 for 2 years. So we're looking at a total of almost $20 million for the first 2 years. And I do want to remind you that this is a program that will be ongoing for 5 years. It's possible that our funding choices might change a little bit in years 3, 4, and 5 based on the interest and the comments that we get over the first couple of years. So from the outset, we're applying for year 1 and year 2. And I see that there's some questions coming in on the chat there, and we will have time to get to those at the end of this section. So thank you very much. Let's see. Well, it says if a PV and ESS installation previously accepted the IRA that includes the charge restriction that the ESS, we'll get to that after this section here. So the process for awarding grants will be that the state will use a competitive solicitation process to fund projects. The criteria for scoring will be published with the solicitation. So that is, those criteria are listed in the document that Julia, I believe, posted. Oh, I'm sorry. That are on the website for this event. Let's see. Okay. So the Colorado Energy Office, Department of Local Affairs, and Department of Regulatory Affairs are going to collaborate on determining which projects will receive funding. Eligible entities can apply for funding for more than one project as long as the projects focus on different investments. And applicants will need to provide matching funds of either 33% of the grant that they receive or 100%. The 100% is for larger entities that sell 4 million megawatt hours or more per year. In the state of Colorado, the only 2 of the 54 retail utilities that meet that criteria are Public Service of Colorado or Xcel and Colorado Springs Utility. All the others are smaller below that benchmark and have to provide 33% matching funds. So one of the first tranche is the microgrids, which Marguerite will be speaking about in just a few minutes. But that second tranche is the rural and small community grid hardening. So this is going to include the eligible uses, all the eligible uses that are not microgrids, basically. So all of these projects on your backlogs that might be included in these projects will be approved projects. And we will have approximately $2.5 million for the next 2 years. We realize that the projects that you have are probably much greater than that $2.5 million. So that's why we'll be using those competitive criteria to decide which projects to fund. Then there's the advanced grid monitoring technology, which is that third program. And these are communication systems that identify or allow a utility to respond to disruptions on the transmission or distribution system. These are technologies that allow real-time monitoring of power flow or power quality on the distribution system. Again, we're looking forward to seeing some interesting uses that are proposed by you, our participants, for this funding. Some of this funding can also be used for wildfire risk monitoring and control technologies, modeling structural components and wires as interconnected elements, also identifying and mitigating pole overload and clearance issues with aerial drones and survey grade LiDAR. Also detecting and mitigating ground conditions capable of posing ignition threats. The fourth section is for studies and technical support. One big portion of this is that the state of Colorado passed a bill this year. I believe it's House Bill 22-1249. I might be off on that number, but it's the Grid Resilience and Reliability Roadmap. And this is going to be a joint effort between the Colorado Energy Office and the Colorado Resiliency Office. And what our goal is to really identify communities that are the highest risk of power outages due to natural disasters and interruptions. The timeline is here. So our draft is going to be due midway 2024, and the final will be due at the beginning of 2025. It's going to require quite a bit of stakeholder engagement and can perhaps be used for some of our final funding years of this program to determine areas that are most in need of this funding. We're also, there's an opportunity for folks who are applying for one of these projects to connect with the Department of Energy's Upper West Technical Assistance Program, which is a free program that offers that engineering technical assistance. So the solicitation scoring criteria is here. I'm sure this is what you're really wondering about. How do we qualify? And Dominique, it looks like you're might not be muted as you're switching over to your phone there. Some of the criteria that we're going to be looking at is, first, it demonstrates the greatest community need, a benefit, and collaboration. Another is that it reduces vulnerabilities and increases grid reliability and resiliency. Another is local commitment and readiness. And that can be demonstrated through a variety of things, including letters and letters from community members, community leaders, as well as plans to move forward with the program. Cost effectiveness, as well as proportion of historically marginalized community members in the communities served. And this is as measured by area median income, or AMI, the percentage below the AMI, as well as the racial and ethnic composition. Also, another scoring criteria is how does this project assist the state in our statewide emissions reduction and renewable energy targets? As you may or may not know, our state has a goal of reducing our overall greenhouse gas emissions by 50% from 2005 to 2030. So I mentioned equity a moment ago. This is a big focus of the infrastructure bill. And there's also the Justice 40 principle from the Biden-Harris administration. Colorado will follow the Justice 40 principles using our state-built EnviroScreen tool. And if you download the slides, I encourage you to take a look at that EnviroScreen tool. It's very useful. So you can, we'll be using that to score proposals on how they serve disproportionately impacted communities. So that Justice 40 initiative, the idea is that 40% of the infrastructure bill goes towards historically marginalized communities. The scoring criteria for all allowable uses will include a narrative on how the applicant entities will prioritize equity in their program use. Also, applicants will be asked to provide proposed allocations of funding by zip code to determine how funding is being spent in diverse, disproportionately impacted and Justice 40 communities. And with that, I want to pass over to my colleague, Susan Perkins, who is from the Department of Regulatory Affairs and is the Director of Energy Modernization, who will talk about some other funding opportunities from the infrastructure bill.
Thank you very much, John. So what we've been talking about up to now are formula funds that will be administered by the state, but there are additional funding opportunities with the Grid Resiliency and Innovation Partnership, which is called GRIP, competitive funding. And what's so exciting about this funding is it sort of goes from the least amount really is allocated to prevent outages and to enhance grid resilience. The second, that's $2.5 billion. The second is to deploy technologies to enhance grid flexibility. That's $3 billion. And then the last one is looking at the grid of the future. And it is an innovation grid. It's an innovation approach to the entire power sector infrastructure. And this is the one that is going to get $5 billion of funding. So those funding opportunities will be taking place later this fall. And then from going to the next highest opportunity, if you will, and these are only 3 of the 60 funding opportunities that are actually available under the IIJA. But the second one is Energy Improvement in Rural or Remote Areas program. And this is a $1 billion program, and it's meant to reach out to the 1 in 6 Americans who live in a rural or remote area. And there's $1 billion available over the next 5 years. And the idea is to build the resilience and the flexibility of the grid systems into those remote areas. And again, the funding applications for this program will also begin in late 2022. Last but not least is the Building Energy Codes, which has to do with resilient and efficient code implementation program. And this program will go through the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy at the DOE, and will also be monitored through the state. But it is an effort to have building codes throughout the country. It may not be updated to the very latest code, but in any event, get updates to the code so that those updates can be managed progressively. So just as an overview, what we're looking at then are opportunities that are competitive opportunities to proceed in a very intentional way to improve the grid that currently exists by preventing outages and enhancing grid resilience, to then take it the next step to a smart grid, to deploy technologies that will enhance grid flexibility, and then to dedicate under the RIP program the highest amount of money to creating innovations and ideas to build the grid of the future. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Susan. Great, lots of exciting opportunities there. Now is an opportunity for any questions that folks have about our use of the 40101D funding. And specifically, we're focusing on these 3 programs: the Advanced Grid Monitoring Technology, Rural and Small Community Grid Resilience, and Studies and Technical Support. Looks like we've gotten several questions that have been pouring in here, which is great. I love a engaged audience. So first of all, I see, what is the 33% and 100% benchmark for energy storage? So that, I believe, what that question is referring to is how much, what is the matching grants, the matching portion that the sub-grantee for this competitive grant will have to match of the funds. Again, that's for all of the utilities that are not Xcel or Colorado Springs utilities. It'll be 33% of the total grant, whereas for those two larger, it will be 100%. I hope that answered that question. And the next question I see is that slide 10 used the phrase system adaptive capacity, and if there is a definition for that.
So John, I might just jump in here if you're okay with that. Feel free.
Please do.
Okay, sure. So on slide 10, it references that in relation to the microgrids and battery storage subcomponents. So that does relate to the microgrids program, which I'll be diving deeper into in a minute. But really essential to that system adaptive capacity is that it's storing disruptive events. And so the idea with adaptive capacity is that during a disruptive event, let's say extreme weather, something that really impacts the energy infrastructure, there's the potential to adjust that damage and to take advantage of other opportunities or respond to those consequences really timely. And so the idea and the intention of DOE working that into this program is that this is not meant to be a microgrid storage that is just meant to help manage loads on the day-to-day, is that it really is meant to speak to the adaptive capacity during disruptive events, not just everyday use, although that could be an additional benefit. It really is meant to speak to that need.
Great. Thanks so much, Marguerite. Let's see. Next question is, will alternative, match requirements, and if in-kind is an eligible cost share? And that is a great question. I am not sure the answer to that. We will reach out to DOE about that. Marguerite, did you have a response to that?
Yeah, my understanding for this is that it does not have to be a cash match, that it can be other sort of project-based costs. In kind, in terms of staffing, I do not think is allowable. But again, we will follow up with all the specific answers to these questions after the call.
Yeah, great. And we will produce a frequently asked question documents that we'll post on our website, as well as share out to everybody on this on the list for this call. That will have that. That will probably come out around the 29th of November. Also, let's see, another question I see is, will alternative non-battery energy storage subcomponents be allowed? Alternative non-energy storage subcomponents be allowed. Okay.
My understanding is, yeah, also that there's no, at least in the House Bill 1013 funding, there is no earmark for it to be specific to battery storage. I also believe the DOE 40101D funding is the same.
Yeah. And when I see alternative non-battery energy storage, what I'm thinking there is maybe that could be like pumped hydro.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I do know that there is that non-qualification of energy generation. So we'll need to look into that and to get a little better of an answer for that question. Next question: if a PV photovoltaic and ESS installation previously accepted the IRA that includes the charge restriction that ESS must charge from PV, will that restriction continue now that the new IRA does not include that change restriction? I do not know the answer to that question. Energy storage system is ESS. We will get back to you on that one. Next question is: the draft program narrative states that Colorado will not prioritize funding for many of the uses listed, including the undergrounding of electrical equipment. Does this mean you may fund those efforts, but they will be a lower priority for funding even for rural communities? So I think the important thing to mention here is that list of possible uses for this funding is quite long. Let me just go back to that qualified list here. So this is quite long. Oops, I missed it. And there's it's very we're receiving $8.6 million per year from the federal government per year for the next 5 years, which may sound like a lot from the beginning, but any of these projects could easily individually use up all that funding. So we're trying to be very specific in our use of that funding. So we would encourage folks to stay within these 3 areas that we're really focusing on here: the microgrids, the small and flexible use, and the advanced monitoring. Now, if you are looking at doing some sort of undergrounding, and you have a good expression of why that is, and it meets the criteria, it could be funded. And the last question I see here is, does the state have any project ideas for Section 40103B funding? And so that's part of that Grid Innovation, Resiliency and Partnership Program, the GRIP funding. And I will say that Susan Perkins and myself and other members of the Colorado Energy Office and the Department of Regulatory Affairs, we're currently engaging with lots of utilities and developers and NGOs and folks to figure out what are some great ideas, what people are wanting to pursue for that GRIP funding, because we would like to apply for those funds. So if you've got some good ideas, I encourage you to reach out to me on that. And that's all the questions I see for this section. We will have more time for questions at the end, but I want to go ahead and pass it over to my colleague, Marguerite Harden, who is the Local Resiliency Manager for the Department of Local Affairs.
Great, thank you, John, and good evening, everyone. As John said, I am with DOLA, the Department of Local Affairs, within the Colorado Resiliency Office, and I work with local governments on everything resilience. I'd also like to introduce Julia Masters. Julia, do you want to turn your camera on and jump on in?
Thank you, thank you. Nice to be here.
Great. So Julia is the program manager for this Microgrids grant program. And so I would just like to pause again here and remind everyone that, you know, we are talking about 2 very interrelated funds. One that is at the federal level, the IIJA 40101D funding. And now we're going to transition to talk about this state funding, House Bill 22-1013 funding, the microgrid, which set aside the Microgrids for Community Resilience Fund and Grant Program, which we will be using for match. And so I saw some of the questions might have conflated these two, and they are very interrelated. So I will be talking about both those state funds and how we'll be using those state funds for the match. And this presentation is, my presentation is really just going to be building off of the program guidelines that we have posted to our website. And so there's more detail in those guidelines, and you can access them through the MCR website. And so advancing to the slide, great, thanks. House Bill 22-1013, I just dropped the link to that legislation in the chat, but it sets aside $3.5 million for us, the Colorado Resiliency Office, to set up this grant program. And so we are, moving forward, this is part of our stakeholder engagement for this grant fund. And the legislation, which we are interpreting the intent of very closely, really limits the funding towards the eligible applicants being electric cooperatives and municipal-owned utilities that serve rural communities. We in DOLA, we host a lot of programs that target rural communities specifically. And the definition we often use is that the county has a population of less than 50,000, or a municipality that has a population of less than 25,000. And so when we talk about that rural definition, we are talking about where this microgrid service will apply. And so, a lot of the utilities that are eligible to apply to this fund have large service territories, but that the microgrid proposal really serve one of those rural municipalities is what we're looking for. And the House Bill 22-1013, very importantly, also authorizes us to apply for, receive, and distribute funding from federal and private sources, which is how we know we are able to pursue the 401(d) funding and use and leverage this funding for match for that larger federal dollars. And importantly, we really take this title of the microgrids for community resilience pretty seriously. There is this focus on community level resilience. And so while there are a lot of different battery storage technologies for the residential level or the neighborhood level at that grid edge, or even a lot of storage options for behind the meter and for that grid core, we really are focusing, as you can see in this diagram, at that community level where we are able to support a lot of anchor institutions and other community services through the microgrids program that we are rolling out. Let's advance to the next slide. Great, and so here is our timeline for rolling out this grant program. We are, through House Bill 1013, set to a December 30th timeline for announcing what our next steps are for the grant program. We do not plan to roll out the grant program at that time, but we will have next steps, a selection committee set up, the guidelines for application really rolled out at that time. So we have been doing public stakeholder engagement. It's how we got to the guidance document in this PowerPoint, but this is our first public meeting. And after this public meeting, of course, we'll have, be collecting the comments and refining the program direction and guidance based on those comments, as well as we'll be doing some follow-up outreach. And so please do access that form, reach out to Julia and myself, and we will look forward to really hearing you out, as we know that this microgrids grant program is the first of its kind for Colorado, and it's pretty novel across the country as well. And so, with this timeline, we do expect we are going to be waiting for the Department of Energy to really confirm for us what year 2 funding will be. As John's presentation showed, year 1 funding, the formula funding is really set. They have not yet confirmed how much we will be getting as part of our year 2 formula funding. And so as we wait for that announcement, we do plan to roll out a portion of the microgrids funding, the House bill funding, that is not going to be part of the match, and we're going to be rolling that out as planning grants. So we have already heard that there is a need for and a spectrum for what's needed to roll out microgrid projects. And, you know, while some utilities might have some projects that are really ready to go and just need that extra funding to push it over the finish line, we also know that there's some planning that's needed for some of the utilities to understand what the demand is, how to roll it out, and some of the technical feasibility. And so we hope that those planning grants will be helpful for that. And we plan to roll that out around the February of 2023 timeline. I just saw that typo in this slide, not February 2022, but February 2023. And we are working towards that IIJA, the 40101D formula grant deadline of March. They are rolling it out on a rolling basis. And so we plan to apply shortly after you know, they announce what our year 2 funding will be, so that we can apply for both year 1 and year 2 funding at that same time. Under this program, we do plan, after awarding whether it's a planning grant or construction and implementation grant, we plan to allow about 2 years for entities and utilities to spend those funds. And so if we award them by November 2023, you would have until November 2025 to draw down those implementation dollars. Could you advance to the next slide? Great. And so just a reminder here, this is a screenshot of the slide that John showed of the proposed 40101D budget, which includes the rural and small utility, you know, community flexible uses, the advanced monitoring, and the technical support. I'm focusing just on this microgrids match, as well as the other House bill funding that is not being used for the microgrids for the 40101D match. So if we go to the next slide, you can see those same numbers of about 5 million coming from the DOE funding, as well as the 1.2 million of the matching funds. And then you see this gray box over to the right, which is the additional House bill dollars that are not a part of the 40101D application. And so we will have a sort of administrative barrier between the federal dollars and the state dollars. And with those federal dollars, including that state match. So you can kind of see that dotted line separating those funds. If we look first at the $1.2 million match that we are putting in, you can see that coming out of that in green, we have another equal dollar for dollar amount, 1.2 million about, that will go strictly towards the rural electric co-ops and muni-owned utilities that House Bill 221013 really specifies as the eligible entities. So again, for every $1 of rural House Bill dollars going into the match, $1 more is coming out. That is earmarked just for those rural communities. There is additionally about almost 8 million that will be open to all utilities. So that is both large utilities as well as small utilities and those rural utilities. So, so really this grows the microgrids funding in year 1 only, we're just looking at year 1 here, to about 6.3 million. Now, if you're a mathematician and you're doing the math on this slide, you might notice that the gray box, the 2.2 million and the 1.2, almost 3 million of match, the House bill dollars that are on this slide do not add up to 3.5 million. It's close though, and that's because there is an administrative set aside that we're using to administer this program. So if you're wondering that is that math. But here you have that year 1 funding. For year 1 of this gray box, we plan to set aside $399,000 that will be set aside for those planning grants. And if you advance to the next slide, you will see that that gray box is reduced again to the about $800,000 remaining, because in order to get the year 2 funding from the Department of Energy, we have to double our match. And so you can see here for both year 1 and year 2, again, it's that dollar for dollar. For $1 going in from the House bill dollars, $1 is coming out for a rural set aside. And really this slide also, as John had mentioned, doubles the year one. And so we are proposing to do the same thing in year one of fiscal year 23 as we are in year two fiscal year of 2024. And so in year two, we will be able to offer another $399,000 in planning grants. So you can see that 800,000 there in gray. That will be split in half between those 2 years and will be predominantly towards planning grants. Any unused funding from year one will roll over into year two. So if $400,000 is not used for planning grants in year one, that will be available in year two. And the House bill also allows us to roll that over ongoingly until the end of the House bill dollars, which is September of 2026. So that is the budget. Let's move on now to the next slide, which is an overview of the eligible projects. This is again where we break out those two different types of grants that we will be offering. That first column showing the planning grants and that second column being the construction and implementation grants. And so we are planning on a max award of $36,000, which we are requiring a reduced match here. We're requiring just the 25% for these planning grants because we are not required to meet the 33%. These are not, these dollars are again being administratively separated out from the DOE funding, which requires the 33% match on construction implementation grants. And so, we do have technical assistance that is really pre-planning, both through the Department of Energy, as well as we will be able to provide technical assistance as to what relates to the selection criteria for this work. But these planning grants can dive much deeper, and you can see some of those example uses on this slide. For the construction implementation, we are looking for a total project budget, the match and the award, as about 1.3 million. And so the match required here for rural communities, since I'm really just speaking to the House bill dollars here, is 33%. Again, as John mentioned, there is a 100% match requirement if a utility is large and over that DOE defined threshold. But for any of the rural communities, there's just that 33% match, which does not have to be a cash match. And again, here you can see some of those example uses: energy storage, batteries, vehicle to grid, pumped hydro, geothermal, small wind, solar. It really does not just have to be batteries, as well as the other components of a microgrid system. So the microgrid controller, the distributed energy resources. And I would just like to note that the Department of Energy is coming out with FAQs ongoingly, and we are tracking them really closely to really make sure that any of the federal dollars that we are matching with House bill dollars, that we are meeting those requirements of the DOE. And so this is really those eligible projects, and yeah, we will be updating you as we learn more. Continuing on to the next slide, I'm going to dive into application and selection criteria. And we have these three major buckets to really try to simplify for you what we're really looking for. And this information was not included in the draft guidelines, but I'd just like to share that we do see these three buckets as being equally weighted. And so that first bucket being demonstrating the greatest community need, benefit, and collaboration. That second bucket being reducing vulnerabilities and increasing grid reliability and resiliency. And that third bucket being local commitment and readiness. So while we don't have a specific scoring rubric released yet, we do have that general, just these three buckets will be equally weighted. And we welcome your comment on all of this. So if we continue to the next slide, I'm not going to read through the sub-bullets here on the right, the red text in the gray box. But generally, the way that we are defining the proposals demonstrate the greatest community need, benefit, and collaboration is those first 2 bullets really relating to the need. You will be able to craft a narrative around what the challenge is, how you're meeting that challenge, how technically feasible your project is, and that you have outcomes that really relate back to the resiliency of your community. In terms of really demonstrating community benefit, we are looking for projects that demonstrate that need through community-based partnerships. And so as much as a utility can partner with anchor institutions or local governments or other local partner organizations, the better your proposal and the stronger it will be. We would love to see letters of support. We would love to see that really this is not a behind the meter type technical solution, that it really is tied in with your community needs. And that relates again to that last bullet on rooting projects in community-based institutions with multiple uses. Next slide. The second criteria is around reducing vulnerabilities and increasing grid reliability and resiliency. And so we have these 3 sub-buckets that we have been thoughtful about around. First, what is the vulnerability of the area that you are proposing this project be in terms of severe weather events or natural disasters? We know that 3.5 million and even the additional DOE funding is not a huge amount in terms of these really expensive microgrid projects. And so we want to make sure that we are funding some of the most vulnerable and high-risk areas. And so as much as you can demonstrate that, we are interested in seeing that narrative and data. Then that second bullet is around demonstrating infrastructure vulnerability and how you would reduce those vulnerabilities. And we have here a few of the utility-based data that we hope you have, or through a planning grant, perhaps you can better understand, but basically how you are responsive to failures of the grid system. And thirdly, we have this data on what is socially vulnerable. And as John mentioned, we will be using the Justice 40 or the J40 metrics that DOE has put out, as well as a state tool called EnviroScreen, which is a mapping tool that really does showcase some of that social vulnerability. And so again, you kind of see this thread with the first bullet of it being community tied, and with this thread being not just community tied, but tied to the communities that are most vulnerable. And we are actually in the process now of creating a mapping tool that layers the J40, the climate vulnerabilities, and some other social vulnerability data that will really show you where the heat map and where those hotspots are in your community. It wasn't ready for this rollout, but we will be able to share it in the coming days. So next slide. And finally, we are interested in seeing your local commitment and readiness. And of course, part of this has to do with your local commitment in terms of match, but also that you have done some other work to demonstrate your commitment to a really resilient grid. And so again, knowing that funding a battery system isn't going to be the only solution towards creating a more resilient grid and more energy resilient community, there's a lot of other things that you can be doing. And we would love to hear in your application how you're doing that. And so here you can see some of those sub-bullets of other programs around microgrid readiness. If perhaps you have an incentive program that saves partners money for using energy storage. If you have already done energy efficiency or demand side management, we know that is a first step before really throwing a lot of money into battery storage or renewables. It's really making sure that you are reducing your demand in the first place. And so we seek we seek that as a piece of selection criteria. And we also want to make sure that this really is aligned with some other planning efforts within your utility and within your region, and that you are harmonizing with local community need. Of course, there's the financial resources being available, that the timeline is feasible, and that you do have that match. So with that, now that I've covered all of the selection criteria, I would, you can go to the next slide. Again, knowing that we are not operating this 3.5 million and the DOE funding in a silo, we are tracking some other microgrid related funding, and know that we will be referring folks potentially to other funding sources. And so this first bullet under DOLA is a set aside that is part of the Energy and Mineral Impact Assistance Fund, which local governments are able to apply for and pursue. And it's a renewable and clean energy initiative set aside. And through the set aside, we've already seen some microgrid funding predating House Bill 1013. And we, in this last cycle, had actually awarded a microgrid project in Pitkin County. So there has historically been, DOLA has funded microgrid projects. This MCR, or Microgrids for Community Resilience Program, will continue on that and be a more specific fund for these projects. This next one on CDPHE, the Clean Fleet Enterprise, there is a lot of federal funding going into clean fleets. So that can include school buses or transit. And we're interested in projects that might leverage these EV battery systems as battery storage that can connect to grid. So through vehicle to grid type projects. And so we are connecting with that team who's managing those funds, and we'll be co-promoting along with that. And finally, DHSEM and the Colorado Energy Office have other funds that are related. DHSEM's BRIC funding, they have some planning grants, as well as the hazard mitigation grant program that they administer for emergency backup power, which is really related not just to microgrids, but also generators. And so these could be the more just one facility tied type projects. They could be more commercial. And so that is slightly different than, really what we are doing. And of course, there's different HMGP rules and federal funding requirements tied to that. And then, of course, Energy Office has a public building electrification grant that they are forwarding. So that wraps up, if we want to go to that last slide, my overview of the microgrids approach that we are proposing. And again, we are accepting comment through December 5th for both the 40101D program, as well as the House Bill 1013 program. And for that House Bill 1013 program, Julia Masters is your contact, and we will look forward to connecting with you. So now I will transition to Q&A on just the Microgrids Grant Program. And Julia, since I think you've been populating that, do you want to moderate a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, guys, for all the great questions. I've been answering some of them in the chat, but we'll pull some out for conversation now. So Tim from CREA asked if we could clarify if planning grants can be used for engineering services, and then also to confirm that the first round of funding will go both to planning and construction grants.
Yeah, and my feeling on the engineering services is that, if those engineering services aren't doing construction, if they are really doing that planning, I think that makes sense. We'll definitely note that comment. And then if the first round of funding will go to planning grants and construction projects. Yeah, we will definitely have construction projects funded in fiscal year, in this next fiscal year. We are just waiting on the DOE to confirm what our year 2 is, so that we have a full picture of what the budget will be. before we roll out those construction grants. I think that answered the question. Do you see anything else, Julia?
Nope, I think that's good. The next question, for 1013 microgrid projects, is it required that battery storage either be customer sited or interconnected behind a customer meter? I would say the answer is no to that. It can be, you know, we talked about anchor institutions, so any kind of community asset can also host those assets. We have a comment about the electric co-ops serving 1.25 million Coloradans, and that we are hoping that the majority of this funding goes to rural communities. Yeah, the House bill dollars are specifically earmarked for rural communities only. So unlike the federal dollars that could be for any microgrid work, the 3.5 that is earmarked for House bill is only going to rural communities and cooperatives.
Yeah, and just to build on that, all of the dollars that you see, both the House bill funds, the House bill match for DOE funds, and the DOE funds are eligible for rural utilities. There, you know, is in year 2 about 7.5 million that's open to all utilities, but rural utilities are competitive for those as well. And there's then about 5 million that is available only to rural utilities. So and that's for fiscal year 23 and 24 for the 2-year period.
Great. Are there additional labor standards or training requirements tied to the IIJA funding that would be applied to proposed projects? Looks like John might be typing, but John, do you want to just come off mute and answer that one?
Sure. Yeah, I just say that this is something that, yes, I know in general that the infrastructure bill does give a preference for projects that have high labor standards, that have a portion that provides training for folks to be able to do this type of work further on into the future. Holistically, yes, we haven't decided how that is going to play into the competitive grant process, but we encourage you to include that as part of your narrative in your applications.
Thanks, John. I see some folks have hands raised, so I'll just go in the order I see you guys. Tim Ellis, if you want to come off mute.
I'm sorry, I pressed that button by accident.
Oh, okay, thanks. Christy Crosser.
Hi, I think I put my question in the Q&A, so I'm good.
Okay,
thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And then Tim Coleman.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to make a comment around the definition of rural in the context of the House Bill 1013 funding. You know, as previously noted, utility service territories don't oftentimes coincide with municipal or county boundaries. So you might have a project that overlaps both a municipality and into a county. And within that service territory of the utility, it could restrict areas where projects could be put in place. You know, as there are parts of, you know, that you might have a larger, you know, a county that exceeds the 50,000 person limit, but in a remote part of that county, which doesn't have the same types of, you know, infrastructure needs that, you know, a more populated part of the county is. So it might be beneficial to have a little bit of a wider definition relating to the 1013 funds.
Yeah, thank you, Tim, for that. I think that, for one, the municipal populations are a bit more relevant to this program. And we may want to clarify that in our next draft. You know, a municipally owned utility is going to have a pretty clear tie-in to the municipal population definition. In terms of the service territory being larger and potentially spilling over, that's where, and maybe I didn't explain it the best in the presentation, but in the guidelines, we do specify it's about where that battery storage system, where that microgrid is serving, and not tied to the full service territory. So if you'd like to continue that conversation, or how, help us think through how that might be difficult, I could see maybe, let's say they're serving 3 different municipalities. If they're to provide 3 different populations, and one of them is rural, I would think that would be eligible. And so maybe clarifying in our next round of iterations but does that make sense, or do you still see issues with that?
Yeah, thanks, Marguerite. I mean, you hit the nail on the head with the municipal utilities having very defined service territories. However, with the co-ops, we serve 1.5 million consumers across the state, and our service territories range in size and scope. And so, yeah, the more flexibility for co-ops to apply under the 1013 funding is, beneficial to our folks. And we're happy to submit written comments to that effect as well. And happy to carry on offline.
Awesome. Great. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you. I see someone else has a hand raised. Drew. Drew, can you come off mute and ask your question?
If you're asking a question, Drew, we cannot hear you. You might want to type it.
Is this better?
Yes. Oh, there we go. Yeah, great.
Okay. Yeah, apologies. I'm working on 2 different devices here. First of all, I wouldn't mind being part of that same follow-up conversation with Tim, because obviously at the wholesale level, when we build a line that might serve multiple communities that each qualify on the population basis, but if there's multiple communities, it might put us over. So just in terms of how we grade that. And then my other question was going to be on the application process and what sort of time frame you envision for when the application's out and how long the turnaround time is. Because a lot of smaller co-ops don't have the resources, the grant writers and what have you, to respond to these. So if you could be gracious, I guess, in how you schedule the turnaround time for the application responses, and maybe provide an option for verbal interviews as opposed to written responses.
Sure, I can jump in there. We are, as the first year, and really knowing that we also need to do the outreach and the technical assistance on selection criteria and really what we're looking for in projects, we do hope for a significant lead time. And before the NOFA goes out, before the notice of funding availability goes out for both planning grants as well as the construction implementation grants. And right now, while I don't believe this was in the program guidelines, we were thinking about a 3-month period for the applications to be open. So if you have any comments on that, if 3 months is too short, I know a lot of existing programs in our office in DOLA use just a month timeline, but we thought 3 months might be enough. In addition to that lead time of, understanding that we are doing additional outreach and technical assistance beginning in January and throughout really this year in terms of collecting comments, if that might be enough time.
Okay, yeah, thanks. That sounds good. Maybe we'll confer with CREA about this before submitting responses.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Drew.
Great. I see a question in the chat. rural definition, Estes Park Municipal Utilities serves Estes Park and parts of Larimer County and Allens Park and located in Boulder County. So agree with the previous question on rural. I'm not sure if there's much more to add other than we'll kind of continue that conversation. Marguerite, do you want to add anything else?
I guess I would just clarify that, you know, when there are multiple municipalities that are in a service territory, I am not thinking that you would add up the population of each of those municipalities for a cumulative number and have that be the 25,000 population. You know, I'm thinking that would be the individual populations of each municipality that would define rural. That's one piece. The other piece is, and you know, we should probably add that clarification into the guidelines. So thank you for these questions. But that other piece is, yes, that utility serves multiple counties, multiple places, but where is that microgrid technology going in? What community is it going into? And is that community rural? Is it serving the full service territory, or is it specifically within a community, as the microgrids for community resilience intent really defines? So we're looking not just for the population of the utility service territory, we're looking for the population of the municipality that it serves. But again, really happy to continue this conversation beyond this call.
Great. That is all I see. Does anyone else have questions? I don't see any other hands up. So if not, thank you for advancing. We have this, oh, I got one more question. Based on the grant writing question previously, are grant writing fees allowed as a pre-award cost, and are grant management fees allowable cost in the grant?
Pre-award costs are not allowable. There is administrative, and I know there's an earlier comment about staff time being allowable. It is allowable as an administrative cost. There's a limit to the amount of administrative costs associated with your proposal. But there are no pre-award costs.
Great, thank you, Marguerite. Can a grant administrator be procured?
You know, we should probably research the DOE rules on this more closely. But as far as my understanding is that if you are within the administrative limits, it is staff time that it's okay if it's hired after the award of the grant.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Okay. John, I'll hand it back over to you.
Great. Thank you, Julia and Marguerite. And just to underline a little bit about about that discussion about the rural community, I think the critical word there is "or," right? Because it's rural communities are defined as community with a population of less than 5,000, or a municipality or a population of less than 25,000. I just wanted to switch gears just a little bit and share with you these narratives and guidelines, show you where they are and how you can give us some further feedback on those. So I'm going to stop sharing here, and then I'm going to, let's see. Oh, my bar disappeared. There it is. Okay, let me share the screen. Thanks for bearing with me there. Yeah, so I just wanted to share with you So this is the website for this event that we have posted on the Colorado Energy website. As we mentioned, that the slides for the event are on here, as well as all the hyperlinks that are embedded in those slides. Also, I'd like to mention that down here is our Colorado response to the Grid Resilience Program narrative, and this is what this is one of the items that we're looking for your feedback on. So this is our 11-page narrative that basically goes through what we presented. Here's our different objectives through this program, the allowable uses that we're focusing on, and how we're doing the matching funds. There's our proposed 2-year budget, which we discussed earlier. And so our objectives include the microgrids for community resilience program. And there's those criteria that Marguerite walked us through, the microgrids for community resilience, which is the open award for all utilities, and the criteria, and then the grid hardening and flexible use in small communities, and as well as the advanced system monitoring. So we encourage you to take some time and look through these. If you have some specific suggestions about how we're planning on using these funds, about the criteria that we're planning on using, we encourage that those topics. And I also want to show you on that website. Oops. You can also go to the let's see, it looks like we need to post on here the link for this page, which is the comment form, but that's also embedded in the slides. So you can just go on here and provide as many comments as you're able to. And finally, there's also the microgrids for community resilience application guidelines on here that goes through the microgrids program that Marguerite and Julia walked us through it there. I also want to point you to, there's a website for the microgrids for community resilience program that Marguerite and Julia have put together. So there's further information on there. We did find today that there was some frequently asked questions for this funding from 40101D, and I'll put that in the chat right now. As fresh off the press, I haven't even had a chance to look at that before this meeting. Okay.
There's one more question in the chat that I'll just throw out. For 40101D funding, is Colorado proposing to list any additional eligible entities that are not listed in the IIJA for DOE consideration?
No, we're not. It's pretty clear who those eligible entities are, and we don't have jurisdiction to add additional entities to that list. Okay. So this time is time for us to answer any further questions that you might have on this program. I know we recognize that it's a lot of information to take in, and it'll take some time to process and digest this information, think about how you might engage and use these funds. So we will stick around, and if folks have any further questions, please feel free to ask those. Marguerite, Julia, Susan, and Dominique, any of you have any further comment to make?
I think we covered it.
Great.
Yep. Yeah, just that we are available moving forward as more questions arise.
And nothing further from me. Just want to thank Marguerite and John and Susan and everyone. And thanks to everyone for their interest. And we are looking forward to both of these programs rolling out next calendar year.
Fantastic.
We do have a raised hand, so I'll just go ahead and call Alan. Go ahead.
Thank you. You hear me all right? Is the Justice 40 criteria a requirement for rural communities that they have such communities and populations to have a successful application?
No, it is not. It is a bonus in the scoring criteria, but it is not a requirement to be eligible to apply. Good question.
Thank you.
Yep.
Got a question in the chat. Slide 20 discusses additional grant opportunities through the IIJA. Do those applications need to be made through the Colorado Energy Office? I would think not.
No, they do not.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, those are opportunities directly for the Department of Energy. And so you can go to those program websites and there should be further information for applying on there.
Does the definition of a fuel supplier in the IIJA include a wholesale power provider?
I believe that a wholesale power provider would be an eligible entity under this program. I have not seen anything indicating otherwise. I know that it's electric grid operator, and yes, I think it is. Okay, well, I think we, since there's no further questions, we can stick around for a few more minutes here, maybe till about 5:30, and then give everybody a half hour back of their snowy evening tonight.
Yeah, thank you guys all for participating and for our state team and their presentations. We really look forward to your feedback and any refinements and rolling these programs out. Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone.
And happy birthday to Marguerite. Her birthday. She's gonna go have fun now.
Yes. Happy birthday, Marguerite.
Yes,
Thank you.
Happy birthday.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.